Welcome to Literacy Talks, the podcast for literacy leaders and champions everywhere, brought to you by Reading Horizons. Literacy Talks is the place to discover new ideas, trends, insights, and practical strategies for helping all learners reach reading proficiency. Our hosts are Stacy Hurst, a professor at Southern Utah University and Chief Academic Advisor for Reading Horizons. Donnell Pons, a recognized expert and advocate in literacy, dyslexia, and special education. And Lindsay Kemeny, an elementary classroom teacher, author, and speaker. Now, let's talk literacy.
Welcome to this episode of Literacy Talks. And if you've been joining us this season, you know we are focusing on the Perspectives on Language and Literacy 75th Anniversary issue from IDA, and it's titled Structured Literacy Grounded in the Science of Reading. And today we are so excited because we have yet another author of an article from that issue, one that we have been really looking forward to talking to, and that is Dr. Elsa Cárdenas-Hagan. So thank you for joining us today.
Delighted to be here.
And I'll mention, we'll plug your book right out of the gate, but that it's been around for a while, and it's titled Literacy Foundations for English Learners, a Comprehensive Guide to Evidence-Based Instruction. And I have to thank you for that because it has made a big difference in my coursework with my pre-service teachers.
Wonderful to know.
And Lindsay and Donnell, of course, are joining us today as well. And we've all equally been looking forward to this conversation. So thank you again. I can assume that most of our listeners know that you are a leader in literacy and the field of bilingual education. But how did you get to this point? What's your story? What led you to this work?
So initially, in undergraduate and graduate school, my focus was in speech and language, pathology and audiology. And what ended up happening is I wanted to know more about myself and my identity. And I went to study at the Iberoamericano University in Mexico City and studied linguistics there. And then I also went to the University of Salamanca. And it was all for myself and for really understanding, who you are, more about your language and culture. My mother is Spanish and my father's from Mexico. And so in doing that work, I never realized how important that work was going to be for later in my career. And when I moved back to my home, found that there were many, many students that had these issues with language, but I found out that they had issues with literacy. And so really making that connection and always thinking about biliteracy. It's such an asset. And I just, see that only about 20% of our citizens in the United States speak more than one language. And you look at other countries and it's like more like 40%. And I wish that we could really do a great job in this because it's such an asset to have another language. I worked in head trauma rehabilitation for many years. And when our patients would come out of coma, it was those multilingual patients that we could get in that recovery. And, we see the delay of things like dementia and Alzheimer's by about 5 years delay when you're multilingual. So what I say is, as an adult, we can still learn another language, but these children are young and their brains are sponges and they can learn other languages. And also as a little girl, our language wasn't really celebrated, nor we were taught in English only and actually punished for speaking our home language. And that we don't want that for any child. We want every child to know you're an asset. We honor you. We honor your language and your culture. And we see you as such an asset and to bring this wonderful contribution to our classroom.
Well, I love that. And your story has definitely impacted many people. So thank you. It's also what you just shared is motivating to me. I'm going to bring my knowledge of the Spanish language beyond the present tense. I'm going to commit to that. I'm going to work on it. I can only speak in the present tense. It's been very limiting.
And those verb tenses are quite complicated. Like
Yes.
6 different verb tenses there. But
Okay, I'll work on it. So as you kind of mentioned too, you've spent much of your career advocating for English learners and students from diverse linguistic backgrounds. What are some of the most common misconceptions that you encounter about bilingual literacy development?
I think one of the things is starting with our educators and professionals in our schools thinking, I don't really have this expertise. I don't know their language. So I, really can't help them. I only know how to teach English. And what I want to say is you don't have to know their language. You have to know something about the structure of their language. And then you need to be thinking about how can I help them make those connections. And that takes a little bit of work, but we can do it. And so some teachers are fearful to work with this population of students. And it is true. We only have 3% of teachers that are certified to do this kind of work. But even those teachers, they have great knowledge about language and language acquisition. But what I'm finding is they didn't have the opportunity to know about deep reading and how reading develops and how you make those connections between language and literacy very systematically and explicitly. And so for me, it's not only, working with teachers who say, I'm not certified to work with, students who are English learners or multilingual, but also even those who are certified, they need this extra work because they did not have it in their university to teach them. Well, how does reading work for them? What extra features can I add that will really are evidence-based and will get me some great outcomes?
I love that. And your article does such a good job. I recommend it. It's on page 86 of the issue we're talking about in the physical copy. It does such a good job of breaking down each aspect of literacy and how we can support multilingual learners in those spaces. And as someone I do have my EL endorsement, and there are some things that we didn't learn about. And you had to be teaching already before you got that endorsement. So it's a good idea that we're sharing these things with our pre-service teachers too, so they can be prepared.
And Elsa, I loved how you bridged the gap for a lot of us, because there are many of us who might be interested in helping students who have dyslexia. That's like my background and the thing that I have done. But it was really, I thought you did a really good job of helping people understand, for the same reasons that you were drawn to structured literacy, you understood how helpful and useful it was. The science made sense to you. For a lot of those same reasons, it makes sense for multi-language learners. I thought that was such a nice draw for people who maybe don't see that or haven't seen that.
Right. And I guess it's also that we get in our little world, because I, also a specialist with, dyslexia, but these kinds of, what we know about learning to read, came from a lot of the research on dyslexia, but it in fact benefits all children. And so what I want to say about multilingual students is here's some extra features, but guess what? It's just good teaching. It's just good teaching. And you're adding an extra features that will help differentiate that instruction for our students. And what are you doing when you teach them this? You are teaching the students that are in front of you to be metalinguistic, to start themselves. Oh, my teacher did this as routine. Now I'm going to start to do it as routine. So I'm going to start thinking about, is this something I know in my language? What do I know about the sounds, the words, the syntax? What do I know about the use? What do I know about the morphology or the orthography? When we do this kind of work, we're teaching our students to do this and to realize that they can be their own resource as well. And when you start seeing them do this, wow, the vocabulary soars. And I give an example. I never knew about morphology. I was an undergraduate student at the University of Texas at Austin, and I took this course. It was going to be like help that GPA, Greek and Latin roots for medical terminology. Professor Daly, he was awesome. I think he's still there today, after all these years. But anyway, he comes in and I start to go, oh my gosh, I never realized I knew these words. And he, Greek and Latin, that's 75% of the English language right there. But 60% of it comes from Latin. So after that course, you have to take the GRE to get into graduate school. My vocabulary, just that verbal score, it's soared. I'm like, you mean I'm just as smart as everybody else, And I just realized, now the math score didn't improve that much. I just have to, it stayed the same. The difference between the SAT and the GRE, I'm like, oh my God, everyone needs to know this. And that's how I really started working with young children, bringing them this knowledge. And some people said, I was a junior researcher at the time. They go, Elsa, that is not developmentally appropriate. And I go, well, we should try it. I bet you the kids can do it. And then after they saw, they go, oops, okay, sorry, you were right. I get that as a recording. But,
you know what, though? At least you got to take that all in one class. I took medical terminology in high school and Latin for a similar reason as you did in college. It's the only C on my transcript. But I also did learn the importance of oral language because I couldn't connect it to speech. And so all of my learning of Latin is visual, essentially.
right.
So,
And you have to use it. And that was the fun part. It's all about the use. And our students need, many, many opportunities for the use of their language. And what happens when these students get in the classroom, I'm glad you started, Stacy, with language. I mean, I just got off the phone with the school right now talking to them. Like tomorrow, we're going to be doing all these samplings of oral language and written language. And I was explaining to them the missing piece of what we're finding out, that they get in the classroom and everyone gives them these sentence stems. You see that in all the classrooms. I know you do. And it's like, okay, we're going to give you the sentence stems, students. And I'm like, but why do they need a sentence stem? Can we get to the root? It's almost like, oh, they're not doing well in their reading fluency, but why? Let's go take a few steps back. Is it that they don't have, that knowledge of the letters and sounds? Are they missing phonological memory? What is it that's causing their fluency issue? I want to know, why do you have to give them a sentence stem? So when we start with language and start figuring out what do they have and how can I systematically and explicitly build upon that, we go from our oracy to that beautiful highest level of written language. And so we've got to start with that. And so you're a language teacher, you're a literacy teacher, and you're a content expert, right? And so everything that you do must be related to language. And really, when we look at our population today, all students need further work on their oral language skills. Why? Technology has taken us away from really having deep discussions and conversations, and we text, we don't even spell that well anymore. So the bottom line is taking it from and teaching teachers, you know what, you can do this and you're going to know your student better. And guess what happens? The teachers take off with this. And then I start to see this language explode. And then what happens? They say, oh, right. Then they start doing their writing samples without me telling them how to do it. They go, oh, well, we wanted to see how this affected written language. The connection from oracy to that highest form of that written language, so important. But it's all on the foundations of the domains of language. And I know you've been talking about this IDA, beautiful structured literacy, and you've talked about the infographic. And one of the things that I didn't get through was I wanted the domains of language to be really bolded and highlighted further. And we're still working on that. There's going to be some changes because you can't do your work without language.
Oh, you're going to be happy with the future episode we have all about those domains.
Yay! I love it. But very clearly, and before people thought, well, the teachers can't do that. Absolutely, they can. And they learn more about their students. And every day that a child speaks to you, that's your data. That's data. And I need to capitalize upon that data. And I need to respond to it. And I need to give lots of practice.
I love that. Lindsay, I know you have had students who are learning English as not their first language. What kind of things have you implemented in your classroom?
Well, I think we've mentioned before, picture support is helpful, especially when, we're decoding these words. They could be all nonsense words to them, right? So attaching it with meaning is huge. I had a question for you, Elsa. I was wondering, because as a teacher, if I'm not familiar with my students' home language, and I know sometimes there's teachers and they have students there's like so many different languages in the classroom. I love how in this section of the article you're talking about phonological awareness and how important it is to think about how we can connect their home language with English. Is there a resource you would suggest? Like, is there a website that helps, that has those lined up, or something if, if I'm not that familiar with Spanish or whatever the language is?
Right, right. And so I like to talk about it's called mylanguages.org. And I think that's a really good place to start because it has, lots of different languages. And if we could just start with the sounds that transfer, because when we look at phonological awareness and you look across languages, like I can look at Russian in English and Spanish in English, and what you find is this strong correlation. And what's really problematic is that we treat the students as if they don't know anything and bring nothing to the table, when in fact, I talk about this, the Spanish language, my home language, that there's 19 sounds that are exactly the same between those languages. Imagine that in a language of English that is about 44 sounds. Some might say 46 sounds, but the bottom line is there's connections. But it's like you say, Lindsay, that what's really important is when I am working on blending those sounds together, to form words, if I don't know the meaning of them, it just seems like those are all nonsense words. And so I really ask that you make a connection to, a simple definition. It doesn't take that much extra time. And then, is this a word in your language? And can you use our new word in a targeted sentence that gets to language? So what did I get to? I got to the sounds, I got to the words, I got to the meaning, I got to the use. That didn't take me that much longer, and it really helped the students to make those connections, and it really saw and highlighted the assets that they bring. Like I just began this talk today about those assets. And so, but first we have to know. And so I think a website like that would be really helpful. And, it takes some background work, but, so many, and I've done that kind of work in Arabic and in Vietnamese and Punjabi and Ukrainian. I mean, just amazing. And you'll just see, oh my God, a lot of the bilabial sounds, they're the same in these languages. But Arabic doesn't have one of the bilabial sounds, but I talk about how you can get to that bilabial sounds because a lot of times they're partner sounds. We call them the minimal pairs of sounds. So that that's how I teach it, and it's just very helpful. Like go from what they know, and then we get to a sound approximation, and it's teaching the teachers about those sound approximations. And the teachers are like, "I wish I had known that, before," but very clearly. We can do this, and the correlation across the languages is very high in this area of phonological awareness.
Yeah.
Elsa, I'm going to give you another plug for your book, The Literacy Foundations for English Learners. I never dreamt, so I picked it up for myself. I've had it for a few years. It's fantastic, phenomenal. A lot of what you're recommending is in there. It's, again, very approachable, gives you very good ideas, and you go through all of the steps. One person I did not think would be an audience for your book, but I have a son who has dyslexia. He's in his 20s. He's been interested in language, and he's had a lot of remediation. And so structured literacy and the approach of breaking it down makes a lot of sense to him. I said, you might, I don't know, pick up this book. It might be. He loved it. And I was kind of blown away, read the whole thing. And he said, it makes such sense to me because this is how I picked up English. He said, this is fantastic. He's working on 3 languages. He has dyslexia. I never dreamt. So you never know who your audience is either, Elsa.
Oh, I know. And so here's the other thing I have to fess up, that back in the day, like in the 90s, I was one of those persons out there promoting and working towards legislation that students who had dyslexia didn't have to take the foreign language, right? And that they should not be forced to do that, etc. But now, after doing this work and after working with many bilingual students with dyslexia, they're all biliterate. But it's using these approaches and knowing what to do, when to do, how to do, and making those connections. And very clearly, there are some people that are doing this in colleges using the same kind of procedures, but the opposite way, from English to another language. And so it really goes bi-directionally. So I'm so glad that you mentioned that, because it's not just going from a home language of Arabic to English or Spanish to English or Vietnamese to English. It's really English to the other languages as well. The relationship is bidirectional.
Yeah, and I think as students engage in that kind of instruction, we learn more about all languages, but I think it refines our knowledge of English as well. One thing you mentioned in the book that I had never considered, I'm almost embarrassed to say that, but the fact that syllable types aren't something we need to teach in Spanish because the vowels are consistent, right? Of course, I know the purpose that we learn syllable types, but just understanding that would help me with any student who speaks Spanish as a first language, and learning some things about other languages too and how they relate to English is very beneficial, I think.
And you'll see that in chapter 4, some of those looking at the different languages, and in chapter 5. But I want to tell you something. I never knew that English had syllables and syllable types. And so what you do when you don't know that information, you really are guessing and kind of, it's trial and error. Which vowel is going to be long? Which one is short? But had someone taught me that, I wouldn't have had all these error patterns in my speech and in my writing had I known about that, why the vowels change. And had I known about the structure of the language, that would have made it so easy. So exactly what you were saying, even if there's an adult learning, English as another language, or you're learning another foreign language, take a look and see, are there syllable patterns and are there syllable types? And, that really explains better the structure of the language. And a lot of times in the Spanish language, people say, oh, no, it's syllabic and you only work on syllables. And this is what I say in response to that. Sounds form syllables, syllables form words, words form sentences, and sentences form paragraphs. So that's really having deep knowledge about that system. And in our studies when we were developing assessments and screeners in Spanish and in English, we, for face validity, we kept the Spanish, like having syllables. But for content validity, we asked about the sounds. And the students with dyslexia, they could all do the syllables in their home language of Spanish. It's when we tried to get to the sounds, right? And because also the language is so transparent, if you want to find dyslexia, sometimes they break the code because it's easier to break. And so you got to look at other things like fluency and spelling, that's where you'll find that. But what I want to say is, that importance of really understanding, the sounds, those syllables, and realizing, oh, you know what? The patterns look the same, but the way we produce them are different. And so just highlighting that.
Educators and administrators know how important it is to close the gaps in foundational literacy skills for older learners. Reading Horizons Elevate is designed to help students in grades 4 through 12 and beyond master foundational skills they may have missed. By combining direct instruction with engaging age-appropriate software, Reading Horizons Elevate makes reading proficiency attainable for older learners. Helping students build a strong literacy foundation is key to unlocking success across all academic subjects. Visit readinghorizons.com/elevate to learn more.
And you brought up dyslexia, and in my experience, and you probably have more updated information on this, but what is it like for students who are learning English and are at risk for dyslexia? It doesn't seem like they're identified as early sometimes.
Right. And what we find is really under identification in those early years, and over identification in the secondary years. And I was not aware, and I'm not going to mention the state or where I was recently in talking about assessment and screening and assessment. And I could not believe that there are some places that will identify a student based only on their English scores and never take into consideration whether they had that issue or not in their home language. And what I'm going to say about that is you get an incomplete picture. you're only looking at one part of the student. But was this ever a problem in their home language? Did they have any kind of instruction in their home language? And I have a fact sheet on the main page of dyslexiaida.org, and it talks about screening and identification for English learners and what you need to be thinking about. But today in this country, we are still using those old formulas for the screening and identification. And of course, what they were experiencing was over identification. I'm like, yes, because you didn't really look at the whole child. If you only looked at one language and you found this problem, but did they have any instruction in their home language? Did they have language literacy? If they did you explore that a bit to make sure that this problem is in two languages? Did you look at the language of instruction models? Because that also, context matters. And so it's not only depending on test scores, it's knowing the student and their environment and their opportunity very well. That's essential.
Which makes so much sense. And you're bringing to mind an experience one of my students had a couple years ago. We have a course where they tutor throughout the semester. And one student had an English language learner as a student, and we used the core phonics survey and the core phonemic awareness tests, and she had only given them in English. And of course she was saying, oh, she just didn't do very well. And I said, did you give them in Spanish? They're in the manual. And when she did, she said, oh, she did amazing. And I said, so what do you think the issue is? She said, maybe she doesn't know the sounds. I'm thinking, yes, maybe she doesn't. And that's a really good resource. What if there aren't, and we keep talking about Spanish because that is the most common language in the United States, correct? Other than English?
Right. It's close to 80%. Mm-hmm.
So what can we do about other resources like that to get a sense for how students are doing in their first language?
Right. So first of all, there's a lot that we can do. And I've been trying to get this idea kind of promoted. So let's say you're doing a phonological awareness test on a student and you were doing it in the English language. And what I was saying is, I'm a speech and language person. And so we have what's called conceptual scoring and a way to look at things conceptually. So this is hilarious, but I'm going to give you an example. So I was working with the group and they were working on a preschool screener. And I said, well, why can't we just do a bilingual assessment and bring in, the sounds that exist in all these languages and somehow use them to form a word for the student that doesn't speak the language? It would be kind of like a nonsense word, but they would be very familiar with the sound. And then you move into the sounds that aren't familiar. So in that way, the ones that transfer, look, they got it. The ones that don't transfer, they don't. So it's not because they can't. It's because they haven't been exposed. And they go, well, give us an example, Elsa. And I go, very simply. They go, what is it? And I go, well, you could say taco. And they all died laughing. I go, but just think about it. Oh, we have those in all these languages, right? And they were laughing and they started putting in the chat box pictures of taco. And I go, but I'm serious. I'm not kidding around. This is what needs to happen. And so my idea of the testing, and I'm glad that people ask for my advice, would be, have one section of it being looking at all these languages and building words from the sounds that exist in all the languages, and then have those that are partially. So I have what's called a partial transfer, and then the ones that have no transfer. And that just really gives you an idea. Is it the student and their processing of the sounds, or is it because there are these new, sounds in this new language?
Great. And do you know what? Forever from this moment on in my brain, that type of testing is going to be called taco testing.
I love it.
So there you go. Unofficially, I named it. And when you're talking about this, I'm thinking too, how much obviously language and culture are connected. So what can we do as teachers to elevate and celebrate both of those things?
Right. And one of the things I want to tell you, even within languages, for example, it's a war between, like how my mother learned Spanish, how my father learned it, and the dialects of, Castilian and, Mexican. And like, I mean, I'm so embarrassed to tell you, when I do trainings in Spain, I go, "Ethithol," and I stick out my tongue for the letter S, right? And then I come back and I'm a different person in Mexico, right? But what I want to just tell you is, even within languages, and we know this in the English language as well, there are dialects. So the other thing that we have to be very mindful of is, like, there's different words for fruits and vegetables. And so it's very hard to get, you have to really do your homework to say, what is it in this culture? And this, because again, it's the same language, but different cultures using that language. And so they have different terminology. Same thing happens in the English language, right? With our dialect and the way we pronounce the sounds or don't pronounce the sounds. And like that professor Daly, I said, "Sir, are you from the Northeast?" He goes, "No, my speech therapist, she was from the Northeast. I'm from the Midwest." Because I was having trouble understanding him, like, here I am, English learner going, "Could you say that again?" And so he was saying, "Yeah, I had a speech problem, but my therapist was from the Northeast." I go, "Okay, that explains it, right?" So that's the thing I tell teachers. You have to watch yourself as well. And one of the things you must do in your classroom is, right now I'm going to model it for you. You must slow the speaking rate. So I know where your word begins and where the word ends. Because if I'm speaking like this, I don't know where the word begins and ends. Right? So that speaking rate and really enunciating all the sounds and not eating our final sounds or some of the medial sounds. So that, really truly makes a huge difference. And so we've got to watch our own language, and we have to be the models of this language and making sure that we're using the academic registers of the language. And I never discount a student for having the social registers. I'm like, that's one. And when you're learning another language, like how your son was learning, 3 different languages, he probably learned some of the slang words too. And that's, I said, that's one way. And this is an academic way. But we have such a resource with all of that morphology that I've speaking to you about. Those are excellent word learning strategies for all children, but essential for students who are multilingual learners. And when we learn about these words and learn and get the opportunity to use them and to build other words, that's fantastic. In one of the schools that we're in, it was just amazing to see, they really took this to heart. And the principal put, like this, out of the crepe paper, made a tree at the entrance and challenged the students. Okay, our route for this week, everybody, is this, and here are your leaves. And the classroom that comes up with the most words wins a pizza party. Those students were all just really trying to listen and speak and learn, this word part and how to build it and who could come up with the most words. And it was like fun and interesting, but wow, their vocabulary was soaring. Right. And so that is something beautiful. And when I work, with students, we find that their vocabulary, it's well above average. Sometimes the STEM scores are up to 120. We're like, wow. But why? Because we gave them these opportunities early. And we didn't say, oh, no, we're going to wait and see. No, we're going to give them these opportunities early, and we're going to teach them about these words and how to build other words. And also when you think about this, I'm a little spelling bee kind of freaky person. But anyway, so like I watch the spelling bee every
Me too. We're all word nerds here. You're safe.
So what's really interesting about that, think about what those incredible spellers with this wonderful orthographic memory do. They say, can you say the word? So they're listening to the sounds. Can you tell me the part of speech, right? They're looking at that grammatical component, the syntax, right? Can you use it in a sentence, right? Can you tell me the word origin? That's telling you already about the spelling. So really what they've done is they've gone through language and those components of language, and they've gone through the spelling development process. And so these wonderful spellers, really get into the highest level is that morphology and that knowledge. And so they can do it. And then I watch, Jimmy Kimmel, and I watch him, and he comes out and they're, dressed like a bumblebee, and they try and mess up the words to the spellers. But after the spellers ask the questions, they get to the right spelling no matter what. But it's so funny to watch Jimmy Kimmel bring on the spelling bee champs. But really, all children can be experts. And I talk about my little grandson when he was 4, and he told me, "Oh, look, Amma, I have a visor." And I'm going, "Oh, do you know why it's called visor?" And he goes, "No, why?" And I go, "Because it has VIS, and now we're pronouncing it vise and visor, but it's the thing that helps you to see when there's sun." And I go, "Look, Amma has glasses," and he says, "To help your vision." I go, "Right, viz, to see." And then I said, "You were a visitor to your great grandpa when he was in the hospital. You paid him a visit. You went to see him." And then the little 4-year-old says, "Harry Potter, Harry Potter. He has an invisible cloak. When he wears it, you cannot see him. Unable to see." That's a 4-year-old. And the principal of the school says, "He's amazing with his language." And I go, "He's not any smarter. He has opportunity." And that's what we want to give all students, but especially our multilingual learners, this opportunity to really understand. Guess what? You have this word. And I'm going to tell you something about the Spanish language. We have the fanciest words, and our words are usually 4 or 5 syllables long. And so those kinds of words in English are typically Latin based. But you might say teacher, and we say profesor, we say professor. So we have this beautiful language that has these long syllables, and we use very high academic words. And I like to give the example of, my son came to me when he was in high school. It's like, "Mom, what does the word placate mean?" And I turned to him, "Jaime, cuando mami te dice aplácate." And he's like, "Oh, so easy. Calm down. You use it every day." We say placate. You say calm.
Yeah.
We say placate, and then we don't use the word easy. "Ay, que fácil." We use facile, right? So right there, I'm just showing you how we use these academic words that are super fancy and lengthy, but give us credit for what we know.
Yeah, I love that. How exciting to hear all these things. I love these stories you're sharing too. How old is your grandson? Still 4? Or is he older
Oh,
now?
no. So then the other one, he's no longer 4, but I had the other one yesterday, I guess it was, and he was talking about a bicycle. And I go, "Oh, did you know why it was called bi?" And then we got into the bicycle, and I go, "You're bilingual. How many languages can you speak, right? And then maybe you'll be trilingual. Think about the tricycle and trilingual." And my son's like going, "Really, Mom?" Like, yes, really.
Yes, really.
But those are opportunities. And we need to work with our families too.
Yeah.
We need to work with our families so that they can be, really promoting the oracy and the knowledge of words and the love of words while we're promoting all about reading and writing, because all of this contributes. And I love when I get those opportunities.
Even in a college class, just today this happened. We were talking about morphemes, and I just casually pointed out the relationship between heal and health and healthy. And this is a college class, and you should have seen, there were probably about 6 students that went, "Oh," like, "Oh, I never thought of that," right? Because
Oh,
they're pronounced differently, but they love to become aware of those things.
yes.
And
Yes.
I'm just excited for the future that we'll have a lot more teachers focusing on those kind of
Right.
morphemes. I wanted to ask you, because you've been involved in shaping policy on the state and the national levels, what changes would you like to see us make as a country to help support our multilingual learners?
So I think the challenge is, and really meeting this challenge, as I mentioned to you at the very beginning of this podcast, about how dismal it is that only 20% of our population speaks more than one language, and that how other countries, it's 40%, some of them 50%, and not only 2, sometimes 3 and 4. And so what I would like to see is that we really do promote that we're just as smart as anybody else. Our children are just as smart as anybody else, but we don't really start that. And that I would like to see that we change our foreign language instruction. We do that way too late. We wait until middle school and high school, right? And we don't really bridge that in those early years. When you speak, and I was talking about my grandchildren, so some of them are in English and Spanish and Mandarin, and so you think about, they're going to be able to speak to about 80% of the people in the world, and we have a global economy here, and we need to be able to converse. And I know English is the language of commerce, but it's just so beneficial when you really understand, a person's language and culture, when you do business, when you're doing anything about that. So I would like to see that we start these opportunities earlier. I would like to see that when we're teaching language and literacy, that we really do very explicitly focus on language to build the literacy and literacy to build the language. A lot of times, what you find in multilingual classrooms or dual language classrooms or English immersion or English as a second language is that we take this approach of, I'm going to do this first and then we're going to do that. We never think about doing things simultaneously, right? As if we're fearful that the children can't handle it, right? And so, really taking into consideration that when we start earlier, there's been some studies showing, kind of the differences in the brains versus, early. It gets harder as we're adults to learn other languages. That doesn't mean we can't, we should, because that keeps our minds sharp. But I would like to see those opportunities come earlier. I would like to see that we really do prepare our teachers to look at this cross-linguistic approach and how we can really get to biliteracy or multiliteracy early in life. Because what happens is sometimes we just, like I was on a phone call this morning with another group, and they were telling me that the children only get, one language all these years, and then all of a sudden they're supposed to magically transfer to the English language. Well, that's not going to happen. We need to be starting from the beginnings on that oracy and build that literacy, and that we can do two things simultaneously, and one builds upon the other. And so I'd really like to see that change in our country, and that change, and that we change in our preparation of the teachers and really do. And we have to infiltrate. We need better in our schools interdisciplinary work. And so, when I got to work in head trauma rehabilitation, we all worked with all the disciplines, and I learned from all of them. And so how well are we collaborating with those specialists? And, you're a dyslexia specialist. How well are we collaborating with a special ed teacher? How well are we collaborating with the English as a second language person? How well do they collaborate with the classroom teacher? When we take the time for collaboration and building together, that's great. And what we know is the better aligned we are. So this idea, we pull them out and then push them back in. But when we don't have any kind of connection, and when everything's being learned in isolation, no. We need to go into, Lindsay's classroom and see what's Lindsay working on. What are the goals? How can we support those goals? Lindsay, how can you support our goals? And it's bi-directional and collaborative. And then that way the students get lots and lots of practice and opportunity. And what you're going to find is they get it at a much faster rate. But we've got to collaborate and see ourselves as really this interdisciplinary team, all working for that same student and to get the impact and the outcome that we're looking for. And these students can achieve it.
Yeah, it's very inspiring to hear you talk about that. We've mentioned throughout this series too, that in the issue, probably the word integrate is, if we had to choose one word that repeats itself over and over. And as you were talking, I was thinking about that as well. And the point you make in the article, that the way that we approach our multilingual learners is also beneficial if we're using that structured literacy framework for all learners. So we don't need to do something differently or separately.
Right. And what you'll see is, we made sure in the infographic that we worked on for, so many, that we said that, planned and purposeful, instructional, but that integrated, is so very important, that it's not in isolation. And so, we do want to promote that. We do want to make sure that it happens. And if you notice on the infographic, it doesn't only have tier 3, it's tier 1, tier 2, and tier 3. And so this applies to our multilingual students with some adjustments. And some of those adjustments I've discussed today really about bringing in their language, their culture, the linguistic components, those cross linguistic components, and really capitalizing and using those as strategies for learning, and not thinking about only looking at it one way in one language, but thinking more broadly across languages. And guess what? Teachers learn a little bit more too. And the kids love it when you go, can you tell me that in your own language? Oh, you just taught me something. So it also shows that bi-directional approach. And it really, makes the students so happy. Oh, they're teaching you something just like they are learning from you. You are learning from them as well. And so it's just that mutual respect and, that ability to see them as assets. But every day we're in the classrooms, and that is data and language, data and the components of literacy, and really getting to those domains of language. And I wanted those domains of language on the infographic really highlighted in a better way. And so I'm kind of still pushing for that. And so one day they will be there, I'm sure. But really looking at the phonology, the sounds, the semantics and morphology, those words, word meanings, and the syntax, the pragmatics, all very, very important. And because that's important for the spoken language, it's important for reading, and especially for writing. And I'm sure you'll do next the IDA perspectives. There's two articles. One of them just already released on syntax, and Dr. Julie Van Dyke will say, and Kelly Powell, syntax is everything. And I go, well, syntax is almost everything, but there's going to be another volume of that coming out. And it's just so important, like how we need to go in that direction of syntax. And really, where does syntax begin? It begins with oracy, and it moves us into, and the better we know our syntax and how words work and function, we're going to read more fluently, understand more, and write even better. So yes, syntax matters, and so be on the lookout for those articles as well. And I have one in, I think, the second edition when that comes out. And I hate that they only give you like 500 words.
Oh, yeah, that's got to be.
I'm like, that's all you're going to give me? Oh, man, put that there, like put it in a chart. I'm like, darn, I want more.
Oh, my goodness.
But this is very, very important. But when you teach me those domains of language, you're covering the phonology, the morphology, semantics, syntax, and the use, the pragmatics. And you're really taking advantage of the student and what they've had. And hopefully, every teacher will see themselves as a language teacher, a literacy teacher, and a content expert. And we need this throughout, not only in the early years. We've been doing the work in adolescent too. In those middle school years and high school years, you are teaching language and literacy as you teach science and mathematics and history.
And much more efficiently if you're teaching it through that lens, right?
That's right. There's lots of cognates and morphemes, and think about it. The Greeks, what did they give us? They gave us science. They gave us, a lot of mathematics. They gave us the Olympics. They gave us sports. They gave us so many things.
Yes.
And but us Latinas, Latin had a foundation too. And we have fancy words.
And just a reminder that domains of language, it is one page, Elsa. To your point, it could be more,
yes.
Right?
I was just looking to see. I know that we put it in there. It was put in there, but yes. What page was that on? I just saw it.
45.
45. Please look at that, and please, ASHA gave permission to use those, but yeah, American Speech and Hearing Association. So there they are, the domains of language. But I really want them, bolded on the infographic.
Yes, and we even had an early conversation about those domains in one of our episodes, and I think even learning terms like the difference between discourse and pragmatics, and we can always refine our knowledge. I know I have as a result of this issue.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for really highlighting the importance for caring about these students, for really helping these students who are so linguistically diverse, but they all bring such wonderful contributions to our classrooms and very clearly to our nation and to the future. They are our future, and we've got to meet them at their point of, where are they today and how will I help them to really, and guess what? You'll be the teacher that they'll remember when they graduate and they come back and you're like, yes, that you made a difference in their lives and they never forget you for doing your good work. So thank you, for inviting me, and thank you for caring about these students and making sure that we teach all learners using the scientific base that we have.
Well, and thank you so much for being willing to join us in the conversation we've had today. And I think you just alluded to this a little bit, but as you look to the future of literacy instruction for multilingual learners, what gives you hope?
So I'm very hopeful that this is a national conversation that, I've had discussions like with Emily Hanford about, hey, you got to dig into this, looking the multilingualism. She goes, I don't know anything about it. I go, this is your next big thing, and I'm really pushing. But the great hope that I have and the great pleasure that I have is that I see many states across our nation taking this so seriously and really wanting to do a better job. And everyone, when you go in the teaching profession, you have a good heart, you have great intentions, but we have to make sure that it's not only having a great heart and great intentions, it's having the science of reading behind you and how that applies to our multilingual learners. And what I'm very hopeful of, like you just told me today, you're using it in a course, the book and what I've written, that this can be available to all universities and that all teachers will have, even if you're not going to get certification and specialization, but that all teachers have this knowledge. So we empower them, because it won't be, will I teach a multilingual learner? How many will I teach? That's our future.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much. Donnell,
Yes.
Lindsay, any ending thoughts you'd like to share?
That was
It's
great.
been so great to have Elsa here. So thank you so much for taking the time to talk with us.
Thank you, guys. Thank you for the invitation. Tell your son hello for me, and I'm very proud of him. He
I'll do
rocks.
That is so great. And, I will say, Elsa, we attend many of your conference presentations. I'm always looking forward to learning from you. And today I've even learned a few things that I'm going to.
Good. I'm glad. I feel like I'm saying the same thing over and over, but sometimes you got to hear it more than once.
Especially to learn those nuanced things, right? That will end up making a very large difference. So thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
For those of you who are listening in, thank you so much for joining us for this episode and this series. And we hope to see you next time on the next episode of Literacy Talks.
Thanks for joining us today. Literacy Talks comes to you from Reading Horizons, where literacy momentum begins. Visit readinghorizons.com/literacy talks to access episodes and resources to support your journey in the science of reading.